All right, I'd like to call the meeting to order
Recording in progress.
and start with attendance.
Chair Eagleson Chesovich,
Present.
Vice Chair Roman,
Present.
Board Member Pease,
Present.
Board Member Willis. Present. We have a quorum.
Do we have any public comment on items not on the agenda?
I have no request to speak.
Okay, thanks. Any agenda changes, additions, or deletions?
No changes for today.
Okay, then let's go into the city report then.
All right. Well, good morning. Let me share my screen here. So here we are at our third meeting of the year. We do have a planned absence at the 10-9 meeting. If you have any planned absences, please direct that to either my attention or Veronica's. And just going over some of the subcommittee assignments that we had made at the previous meeting in February, the work plan goal owners, if you will, and just going through that here, work plan goal 1, work plan goal 2, and 3, 4, and 5. So 4 and 5 did have a ad hoc, if you will, with more than one member assigned to them. And with that, I don't have any further announcements. The Certified Local Government annual report was submitted to the state. So that was submitted early, and we are waiting to hear back if there are any questions or further amendments that were needed.
Great, thank you. So then I guess we'll just move right into the study session. Is there any public comment for the study session?
No, I have no raised hands or speaker cards.
Okay.
All right, well, continuing our discussion here for the implementation, if you will, of the work plan goal number 5 for the Historic Resources Board's awards. So we previously met at the November meeting as well as the February meeting as detailed in the staff report. So continuing that discussion here today, we have 3 items that would be the timing and frequency of the awards, as well as the evaluation criteria and process, and the looking at some draft language for amending those bylaws. So jumping into that, there was a consensus at the February meeting to have the awards on a 5-year cycle. There also was a consensus on having those awards occur in 2026 and trying to align that with National Preservation Month in May. And we can continue the discussion on how collaboration with the local historical groups would look like. Evaluation criteria. There was a consensus at the February meeting of only considering projects reviewed by the Historical Resources Board. Attachment A included in the packet details 53 projects that had been reviewed in the past 10 years. We can discuss today about further narrowing down that list or considering other projects that may be of note for historic preservation. And there was some discussion about what specifications would be for the award criteria and remaining flexible to allow, say, the awarding board on that 5-year cycle to decide on which projects would be worth considering. And lastly, we have the bylaws. So attachment B of the staff report included some draft language. And so it would be 3 sections that would need to be added for consideration. And those are detailed on the screen as well as in attachment B. So the first section would detail the purpose, if you will, of the awards and establish the cycle. The second section would be for the criteria and establishing the number of the awards, as well as the third section detailing kind of what that process would look like of engagement with the community and city council. And with that, I can entertain any questions.
Okay, thank you.
I'd just like to clarify a few things. So, oh, and actually, Alyssa, we pass these down. So in going through the list, there are quite a few duplicates. So I think we only are looking at maybe 27 projects. There were just a few, maybe 3 that were there multiple times. And a couple of those were category changes. I just think we're looking at a very limited list. And I think that we need to go back and maybe see if something's got lost and maybe talk to some past board members, but besides Christian, who has a little bit of institutional memory here, but most of us don't have much at this point. So hopefully there are some things in there, but by the very nature of what we see, we don't tend to see preservation projects, at least, okay, is this the wrong time to opinion here? I mean, it's not really totally a question, but I just want to say that most of the projects we see have to do with serious changes. There don't tend to be restoration or renovation, which in restoration and renovation are going to be the best preservation projects. So I think we need to have some serious psychological discussion about, you know, what we actually want to give awards to. I don't know that we want to be giving awards to the projects that aren't really doing what we want them to do.
Yeah, I had a related question, and I guess I was wondering if it would be possible to expand the list for consideration to structures that have had structures with historical designations that have had projects, even if those projects have not come before the HRB, because I do think there's some good preservation work that's going on that just doesn't rise to the level of like what we end up seeing here. But you know, if the structure's already designated, you know.
And to echo that comment, I took the list of 53 that we received. So over the last 10 years, the HRB has had 53 projects that were within the realm that the HRB would need to review come to us. And of those, 75% are non-residential, commercial, or mixed use, and only less than 25% is actually residential. So if our goal on the awards is to create excitement about preservation, and going back to the incentives for preservation, it reaffirms the idea that the property owners of commercial buildings see the benefit in historical designation and preservation. Individual homeowners, perhaps not. There haven't been enough reason for them to designate. And then further, the permits that have come to the HRB, a lot of those 53 were really not historical preservation related. Only about 50%, as far as I can tell, based on the categorization listed, were historic resources. There were conditional use permits, general home improvement exceptions, architectural review board permits. And so from that list of 53, I distilled.
Samantha, 40. There's only 40.
Oh, okay. So the list had 53 items. Thank you. 53 items or 40 properties. There were about 17 that actually looked like they had some historical preservation or restoration mentioned in that description. Of that, there were 4 duplicates. The museum at 300 Homer was on there 3 times. There were only really about 13 eligible projects that I could tell from the list we got that maybe we would want to look into. And of that, 8 were non-residential, 1 was commercial, 1 was a public project, and only 3 were residential. 8 were non-residential, 1 commercial, 1 public, and 3 residential. So I agree. I think we need to look to the categories 3 and 4 and outside the downtown area to projects that maybe the HRB isn't necessarily seeing.
So Samantha and I are kind of heading this way, but we did come up with one alternative in the beginning, but I think we need to really put together a list of options about what kinds of awards and what would be considered, and bring it back to you guys. At least what we're starting with is pretty skimpy. So, but I think we're willing to look for what, options there may be. Now I'm starting to think that 2026 is optimistic for awards, maybe we're looking at 2030, but I also think there's things to explore. I'm not sure how Stephen compiled his list, but, maybe we could expand the list even from projects that the HRB has seen. I don't know. We should at least review that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested in seeing just a new list with the, other projects for listed structures, and see, kind of what expansion that gives us. And then I don't know if there's any suggestion from staff about like other ways to, kind of increase the scope of the group a little bit.
If I may. So what was appeared in the list here was, as you've noted, elevated up to the board's level of review. There are quite a few, say, planning entitlements that are processed at the staff level, as well as building permits also processed at the staff level. We can include that in a subsequent list for the board's review, and that should have a larger number of projects that we can sift through, if you will. So, yeah,
That sounds good. Is that something that we would be able to do for the next meeting or later? It sort of depends on what I think is a realistic timeline.
I think that definitely could be accommodated by the next meeting for sure.
Do you have any idea how many that is?
So in pulling the report from Acela, there was around 90 or so projects that included the staff level of review. So that's an additional 40 or so. So that would capture planning entitlements that were either minor, say, staff level of review. As for building permits, I would need to run the numbers, but I presume that also would be a higher number if we're, keeping within that 10-year time frame. So,
are there any other kind of items we want to discuss about like the scope or frequency of the awards? I mean, like the frequency sounds fine to me. The general outlines of what we would do to give somebody an award also sound fine to me. I don't know if there are any other thoughts on that, but following the general ARB process seems reasonable and consistent. Okay.
and if I may jump in here. So at the next meeting, we can have, say, an action item, if you will, for the amending of the bylaws. So today is a study session to discuss if there's any, friendly amendments that would like to be made by the board for some of the language that's detailed there. So the intent in the second section of kind of specifying that criteria for the awards was to have it, flexible. So if there's any suggestions of the board, that would be great to hear today, so we can bring that forward for an action item at the following meeting.
I think we might need to wait until we look at the new list, because as the way it's worded now, they shall be selected from those reviewed by the HRB. And I think we really need to determine what these preservation awards are going to be. And I don't think we're going to be ready to solidify language today and decide how we want to define them at this point.
I agree. I think Caroline and I need to review the additional properties that haven't been, that were on the inventory and had projects that weren't reviewed by the HRB, because we just haven't seen enough, we feel like, as the HRB.
Okay, so for next time we take a look at the list and, maybe make modifications to the language, and then would be, potentially voting on it, the amendment, the following meeting. So that would put it in May.
So also, when you're compiling this list, could you maybe give us a little explanation of what determines whether something's minor, what determines whether something comes to the board? You know, just kind of a general, I've been surprised at least a couple of times since I've been on the board about things that were obviously historic being visibly altered, but not being reviewed by the HRB, and confused as when people asked me about them, I wasn't even aware. So I was thinking even like just on a a meeting basis, if we could sort of hear about those projects. So at least we knew that if something historic was going to be worked on or had been approved, at least we had some knowledge of that. So we didn't get blindsided.
Yeah, so let's see here. So I definitely think by the next meeting I can have that detailed in writing, but just for the sake of conversation here today, the ordinance, the preservation ordinance of the city 1649, that does detail the qualifiers of, say, the reviewing bodies. So that would be the three that are listed in the ordinance, which is the Architectural Review Board for commercial and mixed use projects, the Historic Resources Board for single family and duplexes, and staff, which can capture the level of review of either two of those hearing bodies. So that's reserved for what's detailed in the ordinance of minor alterations. So that would constitute at the decision of the planning director, anything that would not adversely affect a historic resource. So typically that's been reserved for either like changes, either a re-roofing permit perhaps, window changes, maybe some alterations to the rear or less significant facades of a structure. And if we want to go further, the review of the Historic Resources Board is for category 1 and 2 resources, as well as the structures listed in our preservation districts. So categories 3s and 4s are not subject to review under the ordinance. So just a little framework.
I am
here.
aware of that. And I think what I'm looking for is a definition of minor, that there seems to be some wide variety of what minor is. And as long as I know what it is, I think I would be comfortable. But since I don't know what it is, and some things that I would consider significant, they could be major or minor. Those are sort of two extremes. But some things that I consider significant are deemed to be minor. And I would just like to know if there's some criteria for minor or major, some definition or some level, and how that's determined. And I feel at this point, from what I've seen, that it's somewhat arbitrary, not totally, but somewhat arbitrary. So if there's any guidance on, to me, window changes are a thing, with a historic building, but to a lot of people they're not. So, if that's a thing, I think it would be good for me to know that, or for the board in general to know that.
Outside of the discussion today at the meeting, we can prepare some language to include in the following packet at the next meeting to provide some clarity on that.
Actually, this has come up before, and I think it's important just for transparency, but also just to kind of understand the velocity of change that's out there and what these things are. And to be honest about it, when it's been brought up before, it just has never been addressed back. So I don't want to load a lot of work here, but if it would be interesting to see what's coming in and what they're asking for. I mean, just as background information for people on the board or anybody else that wants it.
Well, and my comment, this is not unfortunately agendized for today, but I think it speaks to we're uncovering a bigger issue, and past is aligned with this, that the reason we're not seeing these projects is because people don't want to add their homes to the inventory, and we don't see category 3s and 4s. For instance, 724 Bryant saw it has the green fence of death around it right now. I don't know what the project is doing. It's a centennial house. I don't think it's on the inventory. And I'm like, I have no idea what's happening. It's well over 100 years old. Nothing has come to us. I'm assuming because it's not on the inventory at all. I need to cross-check the inventory. I couldn't bring it up on my phone. That's the type of project that we get calls about and our neighbors ask us about. And it, like I said, it goes back to making changes to the code that other subcommittees are working on, amending the code so that we can see additional projects. And then in addition, having incentives so that people want to put their houses on the register. It's all of these goals. It's becoming very clear how they're all dependent on each other and tied together. So.
Okay. Anything else on the study session topic?
We'll see when staff gets us some additional explanations and on what's minor versus major and the permit categories, and then the additional projects that were reviewed at the staff level to houses on the inventory over the last 10 years. Caroline and I will continue to review, and perhaps by next meeting, we can come back with an actual slide that presents projects that the HRB has seen that we think there were actual preservation actions on, and then ones that we hadn't seen that we would recommend possibly for us to look at.
Just one other item briefly. I would, and maybe this is out of order, but I'd really like to see the selection process be rank order, because there are so many factors involved. I mean, I went through this list and I'm sort of like, how do I compare these things? So, yeah.
Okay.
So going back to the list, I gave you all sort of a summary of that consolidates, Toy and Sport and the History Museum and the Junior Museum in Sioux. And I kind of made notes, I gave them names if I knew the names. So if you guys are bored looking over the list and see anything that you really think does deserve an award, Samantha and I would love that input.
And just on that note, if to avoid any, say, daisy chain or violations of the Brown Act, please coordinate with staff rather than coordinating with other board members. So,
Email you.
yes, correct.
All right. Okay. Then let's move on to the approval of the meeting minutes.
Oh, can I ask one question of Steve too first? Stephen, it would be really helpful if I could review the list before the meeting, even if I have like a day or two. When you compile the new list, I just think it does help to have some sense of it before we talk about it.
Would the list go out with the board packet?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just saying that, like, I think this format worked a lot better, not looking at Toy and Sport 4 times and trying to figure out what was going on. I just like to be helpful. I'd like to be helpful if I can. So if you wouldn't mind if I could review it before you send it out, I would really enjoy looking at it and seeing if there's any edits I might add to it.
Thank you for that. And I believe there's, an opportunity with the ad hoc for this work plan goal item to have some collaboration on this. So staff can accommodate some discussions on the list. So thank you.
Okay, meeting minutes. So this is looking at the draft minutes from the February 13th, 2025 meeting. Are there any comments, corrections? Anything? Okay. All right, then I would like to move to approve the minutes from the February 13th, 2025 meeting.
Second.
Okay. And I'm just going to ask, do we need to roll call this since we have an absence?
Yes.
Okay, let's do that.
Chair Eagleson Chesowich,
Yes.
Vice Chair Roman,
Yes.
Board Member Pease.
Yes.
Board Member Willis,
Yes.
Motion carries 4-0.
Okay, thank you. And then in the announcement section here, I think the hope was that people would provide updates on the particular work plan goal items that they're working on. I can start off since I've got work plan goal 1. So this one is actually just kind of on pause until it's agendized with council, which we don't anticipate for another few months at least. They kind of have to kick off the process. There's not a lot to do until the ball's in their court. Item 2.
I put together a little PDF here. It looks like a lot more than it is, but I'd just like to run through that if I could.
And while we're loading this, just for context, work plan goal number 1 is for reviewing the amendments to the preservation ordinance. So just for context of the record here.
Thank you. And Alyssa, why do you feel like council has to kick that one off?
Because it involves changes to the municipal code. We can't originate that.
So are they already written?
I think, yeah.
So further context on work plan goal number 1. So it's limited modification to the ordinance. And this has kind of been a floating or continuing project or goal of the board that when that opportunity does arise, and we're given direction by council to reevaluate this ordinance, that we would, further, provide clarification on the HRB's role and maybe solidify some of those questions, if you will, in the ordinance. The ordinance hasn't been updated since the 1980s, so it probably could use some attention. So directing staff resources without council direction was not advised.
So if I joined Alyssa's committee on revising the ordinance, would it be productive if we came up with changes that we thought were appropriate, or even highlighting things that we think are problematic?
Yeah, so I think an ad hoc committee, evaluating areas of potential improvements and providing that back to the board as a whole and staff, a list of recommendations, if you will, that definitely would be in line, and that would be welcomed. So.
And
Okay,
staff just,
sign me up.
yeah, and staff just wouldn't be able to proceed with it until directed by council.
Thank you for clarifying. And Stephen, sign me up for category 1 or whatever we're calling it, item 1.
Well, ad hoc committees are at the discretion of the chair, but so if we want to be formal, yes. So.
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Noted for the record. Thank you.
Okay, goal 2.
Anytime now.
I think you have to hit remind me later on your iPad.
On my iPad?
Here.
Oh, thank you.
There we go. Because it's trying. There you go.
Okay. Could you go back one slide? Okay, so this is goal 2. This was about improving, making more user-friendly and understandable information about historic preservation to the public. When this came up at first, I think a lot of it was motivated by our experience with the inventory. And reflecting on this, it seems to me that that was an interesting audience in that it wasn't generally people that had much awareness of historic preservation, and in many felt blindsided by the process. So there weren't a lot of people who understood, for example, simple things like FAR is a planning definition, or any of the language that goes around preservation. So one idea, which was yours truly, was the notion of video explainers kind of like YouTube, you got to fix something. You're going to go want to get information quickly about it. You're fixing a sink, whatever, you can find an explainer. Next slide, please. Which seemed like a pretty good idea at the time. So I thought maybe it was pretty good, a good approach would be to look at the City of Palo Alto website and then all these other sources of relevant content to some degree or another that would cover this this particular topic area. So these are the five. Obviously, the city, Mid-Penn Media Center, the Historic Association, past, and the new museum. Next slide, please. The city has a lot of different facings. And most of these outfits do. Website, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. There are some short form videos already there. The Mid-Penn Media Center, which actually produces a lot of the governmental meetings for distribution and broadcast. LinkedIn, X, Twitter, Nextdoor, a whole bunch of things. And I looked at most of them, and they're very different animals. If we could go to the next slide, please. I was particularly interested in a lot of the frustration that we heard about the city website. I requested a site map of it. I did get a list of links. And the first impression I had was having a website for a city is a very complicated thing. But this wasn't exactly what I was looking for. Next slide. I was really trying to find all the pathways in and out of relevant information that one who was looking into historic preservation, perhaps a residential homeowner, for example, might follow or worm their way through. And I just haven't had the chance to go back and do this. I may be able to get a little bit more help with it, but it's something I would like to try. In the website itself, the overall generalized website, there's very little stream media that I could find. It's really in the other venues or facing platforms. Next slide. Then there's a Mid-Penn Media Center. This is an interesting organization. It's been around for quite a while. It's complicated in that it's a joint powers agreement that governs it. But it basically, in its origins, seemed to be wanting to bring television technology and distribution to the public. And that it does everything from teaching young people how to produce content to documenting and broadcasting governmental meetings. These are their channels. But next slide. This is what's interesting. It reminded me when we looked at, a lot of you guys weren't here at first, the bridge that's over the San Francisco Creek by the Palo Alto Tree, which is over 100 years old, is slated to be demolished. And that was under control of the joint powers that run Caltrain. So this is sort of similar. There were a lot of lawyers involved in this. If you look at their board and advisors, it was a complicated thing to do, but you can see who is involved in this organization. And most of their revenue is under contract to distribute public meetings and to make them accessible and to provide an archive for them, hence the overlap with Palo Alto. Next slide. They too have multiple facings to the public. They're all managed in different ways, different than the city, have different information on them. Next, please. The Historical Association. Now, this is, an organization that's been around over 120 years. It's basically appears to be the city of Palo Alto's archive, for lack of a better term. And it's got all kinds of incredible information in it. And names like Steve Sager keep coming up wherever you go around the preservation space in Palo Alto. And here's just a sampling of some of them. Next slide. It also has multiple facings, including a newsletter. And they, again, when you go from one organization to the next, they tend to have different approaches and different ways of doing this. Next slide. They have an extensive list, which I've appreciated it, that reaches out to other organizations. And this is not particular to them, but this is the ones that I was able to find in there. And they seem to overlap with what we're trying to do to some degree or another. Next slide. Past. Now, I don't have a lot of slides about this, but I understand why everybody brings it up, because it's the densest in terms of content, direction. It handles everything from archives and access to things that are online to organizing events. And it also appears to be the one that stays current. It has a time state, a date and time state. You can see when it's updated. A lot of the other ones don't appear to have much velocity in that regard. Next. This is one part of it that I found was very, very helpful, with this notion of quick links. So I thought that was unusual to what I'd seen, and possibly offered some alternative to how to organize things. Next slide. The library, the museum. Now, this appears to be the biggest thing in historic preservation Palo Alto's ever done. I mean, it's a physical space. It's going to be run by a museum. It's going to have permanent and transitory exhibits, etc. It's got a really large group of people involved in its organization, its foundation, getting it actually passed and now started. A board of directors, honorary chairs, advisory board, staff, construction team. Next slide. There's a lot of facings here as well, but this is very early on. It's a big, complicated project. I had no idea how it will integrate in from those other sources, but it's just getting started. But also that creates some questions about how you make things user-friendly going forward. And I don't know if there's going to be with respect to what we're trying to do, if there's going to be somebody representing that within the over the museum, as the museum is worked out and designed in detail. Last slide. So there's kind of a lot of issues, questions, and opportunities. In aggregate, there's a body of content out there that's pretty rich and pretty extensive. There's strong expert and enthusiast community. That community overlaps quite a bit. The roles and audiences and interests and motivations tend to overlap, but there are differences between them. The idea of residential versus multi-unit and commercial comes up again, but not in the same way it does here, in terms of an imbalance in incentives and velocity and number of things that we get here. There's also the notion of historic resources generally versus just the actual physical structure or site that we usually deal with. I mean, an archive of photographs, the things that you look at to evaluate buildings, those are all historic resources, whether they're insurance maps or whatever they are. There's also human resource limitations. Obviously, city staff doesn't have a lot of bandwidth to work with, and most of the other work is defaulting to volunteers, which makes things like content creation and the vetting of that content and the updating and maintenance of it difficult. You can tell when a site is stale versus one that has frequent updates. So that's basically the context, and that's about as far as we got at this point. So.
Okay, thank you. Goal 3.
Thank you. Do we have an option to provide questions or feedback on Christian's?
Is that how off agenda is that?
Yeah.
I mean, this section of the agenda is titled announcements. So, I mean, if there is further discussion on these items, I mean, beyond of substance, if you will, that probably should be agendized, but.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Christian, for that. That was great. That was very thorough. Project and goal 3. So I thus far, looking at the inventory, have received a Excel spreadsheet from Stephen, thank you, with the 1,000, just a little over 1,000 properties that are on the Palo Alto inventory. And my next step is to figure out what the best way to crowdsource getting the pictures that we need to then evaluate how the historic structures have changed or not changed since the last time the inventory was, or prior to the 2023 inventory, ones that were listed prior to 2023. So I have mentioned this to PAST when I was at their board meeting last night and let them know that I will come back to them once I know more about how we want to proceed with this project. I will also do the same to the board. I will keep you updated. But I really would like to make this inventory update the legwork of taking pictures of the assets on the inventory, a community project. I think it could also serve getting the word out about preservation. Of course, the assessment of if the structure has changed significantly since it was last evaluated will have to be done at this body's level, or some very committed volunteers level that we are able to talk to and have an understanding of what qualifies as still historically eligible and retains integrity versus what is too far gone. So I'm working on this project actively and piece by piece.
Thank you. And then goal 4. Don't know, has the subcommittee had a chance to meet?
Oh, yeah, Geddes who's gonna do this remotely, and he prepared a presentation, so I don't know what
Oh.
happened.
Okay, maybe we can move that announcement to next time.
Yeah, I think that's a
Okay.
good idea.
Sounds good. And then we just talked about 5, but is there anything else about 5?
Wait, I think he might be in the public section, but let me promote you. Get his.
Hello.
Oh, hello.
I've actually been here the whole
You are
time.
here.
For some reason, the Zoom was not allowing me to participate.
Oh, okay. For staff, does that impact like the minutes vote? Like, do we need to redo that?
We can state that he joined at this time.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Okay.
Are you okay presenting on item number 4?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so let me just share my screen. So Christian and I worked on this item of the work plan. And again, it's for recommendations for additional zoning code incentives and to continue the community engagement in the process for, surveying and having owners sort of volunteer their projects to be listed. And the exercise was to provide benefit for property owners who don't currently see any benefit in listing their properties to the inventory. So what we explored was sort of 2 different ways of looking at preservation that may not be quite as scary for owners. One was exploring the idea of digital preservation. And we can go into the details of that. The second option was to look at the sort of infrastructure already in place for reuse and salvage. And the idea being right now, the emphasis on reuse and salvage is mainly environmental, to keep building material from filling landfills and trying to have a greener process in sort of the demo rebuild cycle. And the idea that Christian and I reviewed was can that infrastructure and that set of existing, how should I say, incentives with tax credits and things like that, can that somehow be leveraged to uh, salvage and reuse and sort of bring back into the housing stock just much larger pieces that keep historic resources or character defining features intact rather than breaking them down into piles of scrap, or even moving entire homes. Can that incentive system be used to maybe not preserve a home on its current lot, but to actually relocate it? Again, the issue that we saw with trying to motivate owners in some of these neighborhoods, like Professorville, is that the property values are such that even really extreme zoning incentives still are not going to outweigh what people perceive they're losing in terms of property value if limitations are put on development. So we actually contacted a company called Multivista that does digital scanning of structures, interior and exterior. And what you're seeing on the image below is actually sort of a spherical image, which you can sort of pan around and look sort of at 360 degrees all around, and you can zoom in and you can go into details. And if you look in this image, you can actually take measurements on specific points of anything that is digitally surveyed. So the owner of the company sort of walked us through some case studies, and they showed us that for a lot of the digital scans and sort of creation of digital records of structures, they're incredibly detailed, and they can get down to like the eighth of an inch in terms of really understanding all proportions and components and everything. So this is creating a digital twin of the existing structure. So the idea is that this digital twin of the building is hosted on a cloud and is accessible through their interface. So this digitally stored twin can be accessed for walkthrough on their interface, similar to Google Street View. So we reviewed what the incentives for digital preservation could be. And again, owners of homes in historic districts and homes that would not normally be listed on historic inventories, those could be digitally documented by offering benefits and by creating records of their homes to be stored in the city's digital catalog. And this is going to sound, how shall I say, controversial, but the biggest incentive you could give an owner to do this is that there is no encumbrance put on their property, and as far as future development or alterations. It is the biggest carrot you can dangle in front of somebody. Designation of a property as a recorded structure of merit. So a lot of times, if a structure is listed on an inventory or given some designation as a structure of merit, physically, a lot of property owners see that as, again, a death nail in terms of people seeing their property as being very valuable. But if it's digital and it's removed from the physical property, I think you would have a lot more people being interested in having their homes noted as something of merit. And then the ability to digitally walk through the home at any time in the future. And what this would do is it would give the public at large the opportunity to walk through and experience historic architecture in real detail, more than you could ever do physically, because it would be records of exterior and interior, and you could get a real feeling of the project as a whole. The other area that we looked at was for registration for salvage, reuse, and relocation of structure. So again, a system of architectural salvage and reuse already exists for reduction of waste. And it's, part of the demolition and construction cycle. And I believe in Palo Alto, you are required to do a salvage and reuse of your site for any project. So organizations such as the Reuse People in Oakland, we also talked to an organization called the Second Chance Org in Baltimore. And they've created a whole system of deconstruction, salvage, appraisal of value, and cataloging of architectural elements. If you go on to either Reuse or Second Chance, they have an enormous catalog of what they have warehoused. And you can go through and you can sort of see what is there. And a lot of people do, and a lot of material is reused for projects. So also, again, they've looked at the economics of it and the benefits of it. They're very, very familiar with, what benefits owners can get. They've got the numbers down. They actually have examples of donation like worksheets on their websites. So what these appraisers understand is, again, there's greater value in maintaining the context. So one appraiser we spoke with said, if you were able to salvage and move a small house, let's say something around 1,200 square foot, the value of that house is 10 times what it would be if you break it down into a stack of, redwood studs and joists and pieces of trim and stuff like that. It just isn't done that much. So what we would like to do is look at allowing owners to register larger features of their properties that do have, our character defining features. And the idea is, if we can't incentivize owners to put limitations on their house by having it listed, can we have them list parts, large parts, again, that can be cataloged, can be stored, and can be reused? Because the possibility is, if people have a place where they can go and they can procure larger parts of a certain, historical architectural style, chances are the rest of the house that's designed around that is going to sort of develop along those lines. So these are almost like seeds that would sort of go out into other parts of the community and sort of create more architecture along that line. So again, companies like the Reuse People and Second Chance, they have large warehouses where architectural elements. They have online catalogs for salvaged parts and components. And again, the following benefits could be offered by owners who are willing to register architectural elements instead of the home. And again, the biggest carrot you can dangle is that assurance that the property on a whole will not have encumbrances on it. The tax credit for the donation of the architectural material could be split between the seller and the purchaser at the time of property sale. And then again, knowledge, the key elements that gave character to their home at one time, would go on to define other parts or other neighborhoods and other locations. So this is the avenue that Christian and I were exploring. Again, the digital technology is only getting better and only will improve in terms of preserving the information of important architecture. And this system of salvage and the tax credits and everything. This is an existing system that already has incentives, and it already has a very understood sort of set of numbers and financial incentive. And that's it. Thank you.
I'd just like to add, by coincidence, Multivista turned out to be the firm that Sobrato hired for the cannery. We had no idea. That just came up during the discussion. It's kind of interesting.
All right, thank you. And then item 5 we just discussed. I don't know if there's anything else, but I think that was today's study session. Okay, are there any other announcements not related to work plan goals?
2 announcements. So I have proposed to the past board and been accepted as their HRB liaison. So going forward, including last night, I will attend their board meetings. And so that is happening. And there's a lot of interest in collaborating between the 2 groups. So I'll continue to bring opportunities for that back. Oh, and they are seeking additional docents for the tours. And Caroline, I've passed on your name to Susie, so she knows. My second announcement is that I have been invited by my former graduate advisor to come to her public history class at Cal State East Bay and talk about my work in historic preservation. So I'm going to do that on Tuesday of next week. And so I think maybe that counts as community outreach, not necessarily in like Palo Alto specifically, but getting the next generation interested in historic preservation and talking about all its merits, and they're excited. So I'm looking forward to that.
Great, thank you. Yes.
So I did pick up Gone Tomorrow for each of you. I don't know if you already have this, but it's from the 70s. It's kind of starts with the origins of preservation in Palo Alto. So I think we should all have it if we don't already.
Great, thank you. Anything else? No. Okay, then I'd like to adjourn the meeting. Thank you.